Today, for the first time ever, defendant Donald Trump's fate in this criminal trial is now in the hands of a jury of his peers. The presiding judge giving the standard and detailed instructions to these 12 jurors in a case that's anything but standard. We know that. And tonight we can report several brand new developments from the jury's first day of deliberations, which lasted over 4 hours. We have now gleaned new clues about what they're discussing, what they're considering, what exact evidence and testimony they are focused on today and presumably leading into tomorrow when they hear more of it. We can even tell you the kind of instructions that they want to make sure they're reviewing. And so our breakdown on that new information is top story in our broadcast tonight. And here is how today's process played out. The nation riveted and on a collective verdict watch.
The historic criminal trial of a former president moves from the courtroom to the jury room.
We have finally reached the beginning of the end.
It's a day is the day. The jury gets the case.
Jury instructions will be delivered by Judge Merchan to these 12 jurors.
Things just got serious, it feels like, doesn't it?
It does, actually.
The gravity of this moment cannot be overstated.
There are 4 requests from the jury.
This is interesting, and let's get into it. We now have the first clues about what they're discussing.
The one thing I do think is good for potentially for the state here is asking to have Michael Cohen's testimony read back.
So this is all happening late into the day. The judge read aloud the formal jury instructions and then took about over an hour to just do that, telling the jurors they're tasked to make an important decision about another member of the community, this defendant being like any other, and that they operate here now as judges of the facts, deciding the guilt or innocence, the not guilty possibility. This jury has been in court for 22 days. It's heard 16 days of testimony under strict rules to avoid discussing any of this with other jurors and other people. And remember, even if you're a little skeptical and wondering how this all goes down, the jurors are strictly overseen by the court. The judge is there along with officers and Secret Service and, frankly, more armed officers and bailiffs than usual. It is the kind of environment that makes most people compliant. These people have already been screened. They're also observed by the press and other court attendees. I say that to mention there's been no indication that those rules have been breached. The rules saying these jurors must think and take in the evidence but not discuss this with anyone until now. The information we have indicates the jury's first conversations with each other about evidence began today when they sat down together and were marking all these type of things. So I can tell you that began what we think is their first ever discussion of Donald Trump's guilt or innocence, his conduct, his personal life, his campaign life. It all began when deliberations commenced at 11:37 a.m. New York time. Trump was seen standing up and sort of grimacing, according to accounts. He also made some remarks today reiterating his claim that the case is basically rigged. And then what? Everyone just waited and waited. And that's the system. And that could have gone on a lot longer than this. We could have been waiting for days and not heard a peep. It is only those 12 citizens and what they choose to do. So people waited outside the court on them. Lawyers waited inside the court. People around the nation wondering when a verdict may come. People with signs and placards and demonstrations on both sides of this thing. That verdict watch will continue when the jury reconvenes tomorrow morning. But late in the day, as I mentioned, as Nicole mentioned, as we showed in that little package of late news clips, late in the day, we got the first look into what the jurors are indeed thinking about. This jury rang the bell, and they had 4 questions. And now we know at least some of what they're pondering, and it's all about the prosecutor's theory of this case against Trump. The jurors requested testimony about tabloid publisher David Pecker's call with Trump. This was in June 2016. Very simple, very important. They want to review what this man you see here, this longtime Trump ally and powerful media guy, David Pecker, said under oath about that call. That goes to corroborating whether there was an illegal campaign plot. And he's an eyewitness. And I'll tell you before I go any further, we know what Pecker testified. Remember, the jury has a lot of sway and influence here, but they don't have the access to all the information we do under the rules I mentioned. So they have to ask to get the testimony back. They're not supposed to go home and Google it. They don't go outside and talk to the various people or press assembled there. I can tell you that from watching. But we know what he said. Mr. Pecker testified under oath that he and Trump were discussing how Trump spoke to Cohen, and they discussed how the model Karen McDougal was a, quote, nice girl. Now, why does that matter? Well, it goes to how this tabloid secretly helped Trump ultimately silence McDougal. The jury also asked for Pecker's testimony on conversations with the Trump camp about acquiring her story. And that's through a thing they call buying life rights. But that's the second question, and that's also about David Pecker. And remember, the DA argued all of that was bad for Trump because of evidence showing that Pecker's tabloid paid McDougal a buyout to hide her story about Trump. And the argument, and again, this isn't proven, the jury is asking these questions to look into it, but the argument by prosecutors was that Pecker did that for Trump. He didn't do it for himself. He didn't do it for the tabloid. This isn't about reviewing his business or even his personal ethics. This is about whether he conspired to commit a campaign crime. And prosecutors had evidence that Pecker thought, and Trump said, and it was all arranged, that Trump would pay him back for that money. Basically, that this was a Trump thing for McDougal, and he just needed someone else to engineer it. And then that plan was only ditched when Pecker's own lawyer said that could be illegal and would certainly cost more in legal fees than anything that Pecker would make back in the reimbursement. So Pecker testifying, he ultimately decided, having been warned about a potential illegal or criminal act, to not take Trump's money there. So that's just two of the requests that shows what the jury is thinking about. And let me break this down for you with what it means. This shows the jury is at least starting where the prosecutors did, with Pecker, remember, as the first witness, and with the tabloid plot as the key thing, the lens to understand the later secret schemes, the payments, and what the DA calls these campaign crimes. And the other two requests we got late in the day go down that same road. The jury's third request zeroes in on the now infamous meeting to hatch the alleged catch-and-kill plot. Again, you see the same face. That's on purpose. We're not trying to make this any more varied or have any more, different characters than the jury's asking. The jury's first three questions are all about Pecker, who was the star witness against Trump, the first big witness against Trump brought by the prosecution, and they want to know and review what Pecker testified about that Trump Tower meeting to hatch the catch-and-kill plot. Now, you might say, gosh, Ari, well, they keep asking about the DA's case. Do they believe it? Are they ready to convict? I'm going to be very clear. We do not know if all the jurors or most of the jurors or some of the jurors accept the DA's case that those Pecker plots became a campaign crime. We don't know if they may be asking about this just because of some holdouts on the jury are arguing for defendant Trump or saying, yeah, I remember, but it wasn't really a formal plot. And now these other folks might be saying, well, look at what he said. But we do know that Pecker, a longtime Trump ally, did give that damning testimony about the meeting. He left little debate that the tabloid would run positive stories about Trump, negative stories on his opponents, and they'd be his eyes and ears for the things Trump wanted buried. Again, I'm bringing back that testimony. That's the type of stuff the jury's likely to hear tomorrow when they read it back. So Trump's own ally, who doesn't have, frankly, the same credibility problems that Michael Cohen might, gave that testimony. And that brings us to today's fourth and final jury question. They also want to review Michael Cohen's testimony about that very same Trump Tower meeting. We know that Cohen confirmed the meeting, and that in this instance, his testimony would appear to line up with Pecker and that other corroboration. And he said Pecker would keep an eye out for anything negative about Trump, and he'd be able to help us know in advance what was coming out and try to stop it from coming out. That last part is crucial. That's where the DA says the criminal activity began to form. And remember, most members of the media don't go around burying stories for politicians, let alone buying them or talking about getting reimbursed for them. And that's not a left-right thing. That's just in general. Now, tabloids can support or criticize candidates like any other press. Some tabloids run misleading and even false stories. That doesn't always become a crime. You don't go to jail, for example, typically for defamation. But the DA says when the tabloids started acting as the secret arm of the Trump campaign, spending money that should have been donations but were instead hidden illegally from the government and the public, that is where prosecutors say Trump committed a crime. That's why they take it back to Pecker and Trump Tower. That's why they say Trump wanted the Daniels payment secret, precisely to hide the other campaign crimes which he knew were ongoing. So this jury ends its first day of deliberations discussing these key moments from the prosecution's argument. Catch and kill to help Trump. Now, that is not a pure win for the DA, but it's not bad either for prosecutors. Because remember, there's been 5 weeks, 80 hours of testimony, 22 witnesses, 200 pieces of evidence. We count all this stuff. And so they have options. If they were only asking about Michael Cohen's credibility, or only asking for testimony that went to complaints that Trump's lawyers made or cross-exams that they thought showed problems with the DA's witnesses, that would suggest a very different start. Instead, we can see now for the first time, and this is new, that's kind of exciting and interesting if you're trying to follow the case, for the very first time we're learning what the jury's been thinking about. And we have every reason to believe that the jury has diversity, professionally, ideologically, and otherwise, but they have come together and in their group process, they are topically, logically following at least the start of the path the DA laid out. Follow the money, follow the tabloids, follow the cover-up. And that the tabloid meeting led to the very actions that formed the conspiracy. We are here now. We are not here to prejudge what the jury does. Indeed, if you believe in the rule of law, we're following it precisely to see what outcome we get from the jury of the defendant's peers. But we are learning for the first time that at least on day one, they are back to the beginning of the DA's case and whether this cover-up became a crime.